There is a moment that happens in every British election, a moment that has repeated itself so many times across so many decades that it has become almost invisible. A new government arrives, fresh faces, new energy, a manifesto full of promises, reform of the NHS, reform of housing, reform of education, reform of the economy. The language is always the same. Change is coming. Things will be different this time. And the British public, exhausted but still capable of hope, gives them a chance. And then, within a few years, sometimes within a few months, the familiar pattern reasserts itself. The promises quietly shrink. The reforms stall. The language shifts from transformation to management, from fixing the system to navigating it. And by the time the next election arrives, the only thing that has genuinely changed is which party is making the promises. This has happened under Conservative governments. It has happened under Labour governments. It happened under Blair, who arrived with the largest parliamentary majority in modern British history and still could not fundamentally reform the institutions he inherited. It happened under Thatcher, who dismantled parts of the old system only to watch new rigidities form in their place. It is happening now, and it will happen again. The question that nobody in British politics ever seriously asks is why. Not why this particular government failed, but why every government fails, why the pattern holds regardless of ideology, regardless of mandate, regardless of the genuine intentions of the individuals involved. Because some of them did have genuine intentions. Some of them were capable people who understood the problems clearly and arrived with serious plans to fix them. And they still ended up delivering the same thing, managed decline dressed up as progress. The answer is not corruption, though corruption exists. It is not incompetence, though incompetence exists. It is something structural, something embedded so deeply in how British political institutions work that it operates almost like a law of physics. And until you understand what it is, you will keep expecting a different outcome from the same process. So let us start with what political scientists call the implementation gap. Every government arrives with a set of policies. Those policies look clear and achievable on paper. But between the policy being announced and the policy actually changing anything in the real world, there is a vast and treacherous distance. That distance is filled with the British civil service, with existing legislation, with entrenched professional bodies, with regulatory frameworks that have accumulated over decades, with the simple inertia of systems that have been running in a particular way for a very long time and do not change direction easily. Political scientist Richard Crossman kept a detailed diary during his time as a cabinet minister in the 1960s. What he described was not what the public imagined a minister's life to look like. It was not a powerful figure directing the machinery of state. It was a figure being directed by it, briefed by civil servants who had seen ministers come and go for 30 years, presented with options that had already been filtered through institutional priorities, advised gently but persistently toward solutions that the system could absorb without fundamentally changing. Crossman was not weak. He was not naive. He was a highly intelligent man who understood the game being played, and he still found himself, month after month, delivering less than he had intended. Not because anyone stopped him directly, but because the system had 1,000 quiet ways of absorbing political energy and redirecting it toward outcomes that did not threaten the existing order. This is not a conspiracy. It does not require anyone to be consciously obstructing reform. It is simply what large, complex institutions do. They develop immune systems. They learn, over time, to identify threats to their existing structure and neutralize them. Not through direct resistance, which would be visible and politically costly, but through the slow, patient work of complexity. Every reform gets referred to a working group. Every working group produces a report. Every report generates consultation. Every consultation produces amendments. And by the time the process is complete, the original reform is either unrecognisable or irrelevant. This is stage 2 of the decline loop applied directly to British politics. The institutional calcification that Manco Olson described in his research on nations is not an abstract historical phenomenon. It is what happens every time a British government tries to change the NHS procurement process, or reform the planning system, or restructure school funding. The distributional coalitions that have built up around every existing arrangement mobilise immediately, not because they are evil, but because any change to the existing system represents a threat to their current position. And they are vastly better organised, vastly more experienced, and vastly more patient than any government that arrives with a 5-year mandate and 100 competing priorities. The second structural problem is what psychologists call the planning fallacy, applied at a national scale. Daniel Kahneman, who spent decades studying how humans make decisions under uncertainty, found that people systematically underestimate the time, cost, and difficulty of complex projects. They focus on the best case scenario. They discount obstacles. They assume that their intentions will translate smoothly into outcomes. This is not a character flaw. It is a feature of how the human brain processes future events. We are wired to imagine the destination more vividly than the journey. British governments do this constantly and at enormous scale. The manifesto is written in best-case scenario language. The costings are done under optimistic assumptions. The timeline assumes smooth implementation, and then reality arrives. The NHS reform costs 3 times what was projected and takes twice as long. The housing targets collide with planning law and local opposition and geological surveys and legal challenges. The economic growth forecast that justified the entire spending plan turns out to have been optimistic by a significant margin. And the government, now 2 years in and already behind on everything, has to start making choices about which promises to quietly abandon. What the public experiences as betrayal is often simply the collision between the simplicity of a promise and the complexity of a system. Not that this excuses it. The promises were made. The mandate was given on the basis of those promises. But it does explain why the pattern repeats regardless of who is making the promises. The third structural problem is the British electoral cycle itself. 5 years is not enough time to reform a complex institution. It is barely enough time to understand one. The NHS employs more people than the Chinese army. The British planning system is built on legislation that stretches back to 1947 and has been amended hundreds of times since. The school system involves hundreds of thousands of teachers, millions of parents, dozens of competing regulatory bodies, and a curriculum that has been politically contested for generations. Meaningful reform of any of these things requires not 5 years, but 15 or 20. It requires consistency of direction across multiple governments. It requires the willingness to absorb short-term pain for long-term gain across an electoral cycle that punishes short-term pain and rewards short-term gain. No democratic government can consistently do this. The incentive structure of electoral politics pushes relentlessly toward the short term. Announce something visible. Cut a ribbon. Claim credit for a number going up. Avoid anything that will hurt before the next election, even if it would help after it. The result is a political system that is structurally incapable of delivering the kind of deep, sustained reform that the country's problems actually require. Margaret Thatcher understood this better than almost any other British Prime Minister. She was willing to absorb enormous short-term pain. The recession of the early 1980s, the miners' strike, the poll tax rebellion, in pursuit of structural change. And she did achieve structural change of a kind. But what she could not control was what happened after her. The reforms she made created new rigidities. Privatised industries became new distributional coalitions, protecting their position against further reform. The financial sector she liberated became the source of the instability that defined the following 3 decades. She broke one set of constraints and created another. This is the cruelest part of the pattern. Even when reform succeeds, it tends to generate the conditions for the next failure. Because reform does not eliminate the forces that resist change, it simply rearranges them. The interest groups that were threatened by the reform adapt. They find new positions within the new system. They build new coalitions. And within a generation, the reformed system has developed its own rigidities, its own immune responses, its own capacity to absorb and neutralise the next attempt at change. And so, Britain finds itself here, a country that has been attempting to reform itself continuously for at least 50 years, that has produced government after government of intelligent, motivated people who understood the problems clearly, that has generated reports and white papers and royal commissions and select committee inquiries of extraordinary quality and insight, and that has nonetheless found itself, decade after decade, in roughly the same position, aware of its problems, unable to fix them, generating enormous political energy around the promise of change, and then watching that energy dissipate into the complexity of institutions that were never designed to change quickly and have had 50 years of practice absorbing attempts to make them do so. The loop does not care about your politics. It does not favour left or right. It does not distinguish between genuine reformers and cynical opportunists. It simply does what large, complex systems do when they encounter political pressure. It absorbs it. It processes it. It returns something that looks enough like change to satisfy the immediate political need. And then it continues. The question that British politics has never seriously confronted is whether this loop can be broken within the existing system, whether a democratic government with a 5-year mandate can overcome institutions that have been accumulating resistance to change for generations, whether the planning fallacy can be corrected for at a national scale, whether the electoral incentives that push toward the short term can be restructured enough to allow the long-term thinking that genuine reform requires. History does not give a comforting answer, but it gives one consistent clue. The countries that have managed genuine institutional reform did not do it through normal political processes. They did it through crisis, through a moment of disruption so significant that the existing coalitions lost their grip. The existing immune responses were overwhelmed, and genuine change became possible in a window that would not stay open for long. Britain has had those moments. The aftermath of the Second World War was one of them. The creation of the NHS, the welfare state, the 1947 planning system, the nationalisation of key industries, all of it happened in a window of 5 years when the normal rules of institutional resistance were briefly suspended by the scale of what the country had just been through. That window closed. The new institutions developed their own immune systems, and the loop resumed. The next time you watch a British politician stand at a podium and promise reform, you will know something they may not fully know themselves, that the promise is real, that the intention may be genuine, that the plan may even be good, and that the system they are about to encounter has been defeating plans like theirs for longer than most of them have been alive. The loop does not announce itself, it simply waits, and it is very, very patient.